the snow swallowed the world whole. It started as a gentle drift in the morning, tiny, harmless flakes that melted on contact with my parka. By midday, the flakes thickened into fat tufts of white, and the wind picked up, howling through the pines like a living thing. By nightfall, I could barely see my own boots breaking through the accumulating drifts. I wasn't alone. Jason and Marcy, my hiking companions, trudged ahead, their silhouettes just visible through the blowing snow. The plan had been simple, a 3-day winter hike along a well-marked trail in the Rockies. We were experienced enough to handle the cold, and the forecast had looked clear, until it didn't. "Hold up!" Jason's voice cut through the wind. He turned, his face red and tight with cold. His beard was crusted with frost, and snow clung to the hood of his jacket. "We're off the trail." I glanced around, my heart sinking. He was right. The neat line of markers that had guided us through the forest was nowhere to be seen. In every direction, the trees stood like skeletal sentinels, their branches heavy with snow. Marcy staggered to a stop beside him, breathing hard. "We can't just stand here. We need to find shelter." She was right. The temperature was dropping fast, and the snow showed no sign of letting up. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Maybe we passed the trail. Let's backtrack a bit." Jason shook his head. "We'd waste more time. There's a river about a mile west. If we follow it downstream, we'll hit the ranger station." "That's assuming we find the river," Marcy said, crossing her arms. Her teeth chattered audibly. "We don't have a choice," Jason snapped. I wanted to argue, but the cold was starting to creep through my layers. My gloves felt thin, useless against the biting wind. I glanced at Marcy, then Jason, and nodded. "West it is." We pressed on, the snow falling harder now, stinging my face like needles. My legs burned with each step, the drifts reaching higher and higher, until it felt like I was wading through quicksand. I couldn't tell how much time passed. Minutes, hours? My watch was buried under 3 layers of clothing, and every moment blurred into the next. Finally, Jason shouted something and pointed ahead. At first I didn't see it, but then the trees thinned, and a glint of moving water appeared through the storm. The river. Relief surged through me, warm and fleeting. But the river was no comfort. Its banks were steep and icy, and the current was faster than I expected, churning beneath a thin crust of ice. Following it downstream wouldn't be easy, but it was our only hope. "We'll take it slow," Jason said, as if reading my thoughts. We turned south, keeping the river to our right, and walked. The wind grew fiercer, cutting through my jacket like a blade. The trees offered little protection now, and I started to lose feeling in my fingers and toes. Marcy stumbled first. She let out a sharp cry as her ankle twisted, sending her sprawling into the snow. Jason and I rushed to her side, but she waved us off, her face pale and tight with pain. "It's fine," she said through gritted teeth. "Just a sprain." "It's not fine," Jason said. He glanced at me, his eyes hard. "We have to stop. She can't keep going like this." "There's no shelter," I said. "We'll freeze." Jason looked around, scanning the trees. Then he pointed to a fallen pine, its trunk thick and solid, half buried in snow. "We'll dig out a space under there. It's not perfect, but it'll block the wind." We worked in silence, using our hands and a small collapsible shovel from Jason's pack to clear the snow around the tree. It was slow, grueling work, and by the time we finished, my fingers felt like blocks of wood. Marcy crawled into the makeshift shelter first, followed by Jason. I squeezed in last, the 3 of us pressed together for warmth. It was cramped and uncomfortable, but the wind was less vicious here, the snow piling up around the trunk like a cocoon. Jason lit a small camping stove, the flame casting flickering shadows against the snow. We passed around a tin of soup, each of us taking small sips to conserve it. The warmth spread through me, but it wasn't enough to chase away the cold that had seeped into my bones. "We'll head out at first light," Jason said, his voice low. "If the storm stops," Marcy muttered. None of us slept well. The wind howled through the night, and the cold pressed in from every direction. By morning, the storm had eased slightly, but the sky was still gray, and the snow still fell in steady flurries. Marcy's ankle had swollen overnight, and she winced with every step as we set off again. The riverbanks grew steeper and more treacherous, forcing us to climb higher into the trees. I kept my eyes on Jason's back, trying to ignore the gnawing fear in my gut. By midday, the fear had turned to dread. We hadn't seen any sign of the ranger station or anything resembling civilization. My legs ached and my head throbbed from dehydration. Then I heard it, a low, rumbling crack like distant thunder. "Stop!" I shouted. Jason froze, turning toward me with a confused look. The sound came again, louder this time, and I realized with horror what it was. The snow beneath us shifted, a ripple running through it like a wave. Avalanche! There was no time to think, no time to react. The ground gave way beneath my feet, and I was falling, tumbling, sliding down the slope in a blinding whirl of snow and ice. I clawed at the ground, trying to stop myself, but the force was too strong. When I finally came to a stop, I was buried up to my chest in snow, my arms pinned at awkward angles. My face was pressed against the cold, and panic surged through me as I realized I couldn't move. I forced myself to breathe slowly, trying to stay calm. My fingers scraped at the snow, digging myself free inch by inch. It felt like hours before I managed to wriggle out, gasping for air. "Jason, Marcy!" I shouted, my voice hoarse. There was no answer. I staggered to my feet, the world spinning around me. The slope was a chaotic mess of broken trees and churned snow. Then I saw it, a dark shape half buried in the snow. I stumbled toward it, my heart pounding. Jason. He wasn't moving. I dropped to my knees, shaking him, but his body was limp, his face pale and still. I choked back a sob, looking around wildly for Marcy. She was nowhere to be seen. The storm was picking up again, the wind howling like a wild animal. I was alone, and I wasn't sure I'd make it out alive. The snowstorm intensified as I knelt beside Jason, the icy wind gnawing at my exposed skin. My heart thudded in my chest, and every instinct screamed at me to move, to find shelter before the storm buried me too. But I couldn't leave Jason like this, not yet. "Come on, man," I muttered, shaking his shoulder. "Don't do this to me." His eyelids fluttered. Relief washed over me so suddenly I almost fell backward. He wasn't gone, just unconscious. I slapped his cheeks gently, my hands trembling with cold. "Jason, wake up!" He groaned, a faint sound barely audible over the wind, but it was enough. I grabbed his arms and started dragging him toward a cluster of trees nearby, their thick trunks forming a natural barrier against the wind. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. Once I got him propped up against a tree, I took a moment to catch my breath. My arms ached, my legs were leaden, and my face stung from the relentless cold. But Jason was alive, and that was what mattered. "Marcy," I whispered, turning my gaze to the chaos of snow and shattered branches around us. She was out there somewhere. I couldn't leave her. "I'll be back," I said to Jason, though he was still only half conscious. I left my pack beside him, pulling out a bright orange emergency blanket and draping it over his shoulders. "Stay warm, okay?" I scanned the slope, looking for anything, a flash of color, a shape in the snow, that could lead me to Marcy. My heart sank as the storm's fury obscured the landscape, turning everything into a swirling white blur. But then I heard it, a faint, muffled sound, almost drowned out by the wind. Voice, "Help!" I bolted toward the sound, stumbling and slipping over the uneven ground. "Marcy!" I shouted, my voice raw and desperate. "Here!" Her voice was weak but unmistakable. I followed it, finally spotting her arm sticking out of the snow. She was buried up to her neck, her face pale and etched with fear. "I've got you!" I dropped to my knees and started digging with my bare hands. The snow was heavy, packed tight around her body, and every movement sent sharp pain shooting through my fingers. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. It felt like an eternity, but I finally freed her upper body. She gasped, clutching my arm. I thought I wasn't going to make it. "Not on my watch," I said, trying to muster a reassuring smile. "Can you move your legs?" She winced as she shifted. "I think so. Nothing's broken." "Good. Let's get you out of here." I helped her wiggle free, pulling her to her feet. She swayed unsteadily, her face pinched with pain, but she was standing. That was enough for now. "Jason?" she asked, her voice trembling. "He's alive. Back by the trees. We need to get to him and figure out our next move." Marcy nodded, and together we stumbled back toward the makeshift shelter. Jason was still slumped against the tree, but he looked up as we approached, his eyes glassy but aware. Relief flickered across his face when he saw Marcy. "You found her," he murmured. "We're not done yet," I said, pulling the emergency blanket tighter around him. "We need to keep moving. If we stay here, we're as good as frozen." Jason nodded weakly. Marcy helped him to his feet. and I slung my pack over my shoulders, leading the way down the slope. The storm was relentless, but the river was still our best chance. If we could follow it far enough, we'd find help. We had to. Hours passed in a blur of snow and ice. The cold was a constant, gnawing presence, sapping our strength with every step. Jason leaned heavily on Marcy and me, his breathing shallow. Marcy limped, her ankle worsening with every passing minute. But we didn't stop. Then, through the haze of snow, I saw it, a shape looming in the distance. At first, I thought it was just another tree, but as we drew closer, details emerged. A roof, walls, a chimney, a cabin. "There!" I shouted, my voice breaking. "A cabin!" Marcy let out a sob of relief, and we pushed forward with renewed energy. The cabin was small and weathered, but it was solid, its windows dark and frosted over. I pounded on the door, my numb fingers barely feeling the impact. No answer. I didn't wait. I shoved the door open, the hinges protesting with a loud creak. Inside, it was cold but dry, the air heavy with the scent of wood and ash. A fireplace sat against one wall, a stack of logs beside it. A small table and chairs occupied the center of the room, and a cot was pushed into the corner. "Help me get Jason inside," I said, pulling him through the doorway. Marcy followed, and we eased him onto the cot. I immediately set to work, stacking logs in the fireplace and lighting a match. The wood caught quickly, and the warmth spread through the room like a miracle. Marcy sank into one of the chairs, her face pale but calm. Jason's breathing evened out, and some color returned to his cheeks. I rummaged through the cabin, finding a few tins of food and a kettle. Within minutes, we had warm soup and tea, the simple meal feeling like a feast after the nightmare we'd endured. For the first time in hours, I let myself relax. We were safe, at least for now. As the fire crackled and the storm raged outside, I looked at Jason and Marcy, gratitude swelling in my chest. We had survived, and no matter what waited for us beyond the storm, I knew we would face it together. For the next 2 days, we stayed holed up in the cabin. The storm raged on, and the world outside remained a frozen wasteland. But inside, we found a fragile sense of peace. Jason regained his strength, though he moved cautiously, and Marcy's ankle, wrapped in strips of cloth we found in the cabin, showed signs of healing. The fire became our lifeline, and we took turns feeding it, the steady warmth keeping the cold at bay. We wondered about the owner of the cabin. Someone had stocked the firewood and left the tins of food, but there were no signs of their return. Each night, I listened for footsteps in the snow, half hoping, half fearing that someone might come. On the morning of the third day, I was stoking the fire when I heard it, the crunch of boots outside. My heart leapt into my throat. I motioned for Jason and Marcy to stay back as I approached the door. The sound grew louder, closer, until finally, a firm knock echoed through the cabin. I pulled the door open to reveal a man bundled in a heavy coat and hat, his face ruddy from the cold. His gray beard was dusted with snow, and a hunting rifle was slung over his shoulder. "Well, I'll be," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Didn't expect to find anyone here." "We got caught in the storm," I said quickly. "We were hiking and got lost. Your cabin saved our lives." The man's gaze swept over me, then past my shoulder to Jason and Marcy. His eyes softened, and he nodded. "That's what it's there for. Name's Carl. I usually come up here to hunt, but it looks like I arrived just in time." "Thank you," Marcy said from her seat by the fire, her voice weak but sincere. Carl stepped inside, shaking the snow from his coat. "You're lucky the storm's breaking. I've got a truck parked down the mountain. If you're up for the trip, I'll get you back to town." Relief surged through me so strongly I nearly collapsed. We'd be grateful. An hour later, bundled up and leaning on each other for support, we followed Carl through the thinning snow. The hike was slow, but his familiarity with the terrain made all the difference. When we finally reached his truck, the sight of it, a beaten but sturdy old pickup, felt like a miracle. The ride back was quiet, the three of us too exhausted to speak much, but the warmth of the truck's heater and the knowledge that we were heading back to civilization kept our spirits high. By the time we reached town, the storm had cleared entirely, leaving the mountains sparkling under a bright winter sun. Carl dropped us off at a small clinic, where we were checked over and treated for frostbite and minor injuries. As we thanked him one last time, he waved us off with a gruff smile. "Just glad you made it," he said. Next time, keep an eye on the forecast. We laughed, a little awkwardly, a little gratefully, and then just like that, he was gone, his truck rumbling back toward the mountains. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about how close we had come to not making it. But as I sat with Jason and Marcy in the warmth of a small cafe, steaming mugs of cocoa in our hands, I realized something. Survival isn't just about strength or skill. It's about perseverance, trust, and sometimes a little help from a stranger. We were alive, and we were going home. It was supposed to be an easy job, house-sitting for a wealthy couple while they were away on vacation. The couple lived in a sprawling suburban mansion, tucked away on a quiet cul-de-sac far from the hustle and bustle of the city. I'd been hired by their neighbor, someone who I'd met once or twice at the local coffee shop, so I felt comfortable enough taking care of their home. The couple gave me a brief tour of the house before they left. A sprawling open-plan living area, a gourmet kitchen with more high-end appliances than I could name, and of course, the extensive security system. They were very clear about that. "Everything's automated," the wife Melanie explained. "Just make sure you're aware of the motion sensors. They can be a bit sensitive." Her husband, Craig, nodded in agreement, adding, "Don't worry, if there's any weirdness, just reset the system from the control panel in the study. You'll be fine." I wasn't worried, though. It was a great house, and all I had to do was water the plants, collect the mail, and keep an eye on things. They'd be back in a week. The first couple of nights were uneventful. I watched TV, made a few meals, and occasionally checked the security system, which I'd already reset twice due to false alarms when a gust of wind or a stray animal set off the motion detectors. The house had a lot of windows, and the sensors were set to detect anything that moved within a certain radius. Then, on the third night, something changed. I was sitting in the living room, scrolling through my phone, when I heard the soft chime of the motion detectors go off. It was late, around 11:30 p.m., and there shouldn't have been anything outside to trigger it. I glanced at the security panel on the wall, and the display showed that motion had been detected in the hallway leading to the kitchen. I froze. I'd been sitting in the living room the entire time, and I hadn't heard a thing. I got up cautiously and walked down the hallway, my footsteps muffled by the carpet. The kitchen was empty, the lights dimmed, and everything was in place. Still, something didn't feel right. I double-checked the security system's feed, but everything looked normal. No intruders, no animals outside, nothing to explain the alarm. I shrugged it off and went back to the couch. Maybe it was just a glitch. The next night, the alarm went off again. This time, the motion was detected upstairs, in the master bedroom. I hadn't been up there since the couple left, and I felt a knot of anxiety tightening in my chest. I grabbed the remote to reset the system, but my hand paused mid-air when I saw something unusual on the feed. A faint movement, almost imperceptible, flickering at the edge of the master bedroom door. It looked like a shadow. I didn't know why, but something inside me snapped. I had to check. I climbed the stairs, trying to steady my breath. The hallway upstairs was quiet, and everything was still. But when I reached the master bedroom door, I felt a cold gust of air seeping under the crack. I hadn't turned on the fan, and the window was shut. I hesitated for a long moment before I slowly turned the handle. The door creaked open. Inside, the room looked just as it had when the couple left. The bed neatly made, the lights off, no sign of anything out of the ordinary. I walked in, glancing around nervously. And then my eyes landed on the closet. The door was slightly ajar, just a crack, but I could see the faint outline of a figure standing inside. My heart hammered in my chest. I called out, my voice shaking, "Hello? Is anyone in there?" No response. I felt a chill creep over me, my instincts screaming to get out. But I couldn't move. I couldn't turn away. I slowly walked to the closet and swung the door open. It was empty. There was nothing there. I took a shaky breath, the adrenaline still buzzing through my body. I checked the other rooms upstairs, the bathrooms, the guest bedroom. Nothing. It didn't make sense. But the next morning, something else didn't make sense either. I was in the kitchen, making coffee when I heard the soft click of the study door opening. I hadn't been in there since the first day, and I knew I had locked it when I left, but now it was wide open. I walked over cautiously, my heart in my throat. The room was exactly how I remembered it. Bookshelves lined with dusty tomes, a desk cluttered with papers. But something was off. On the desk, next to the security control panel, was a new note. It was written in neat, precise handwriting, but it wasn't my handwriting. "We're watching. Reset the system if you want to stay safe." My blood ran cold. I checked the security footage for that night, but there was nothing, just the usual feeds, the kitchen, the hallway. No sign of anyone entering the study. I went straight to the control panel and tried to reset it, but it didn't work. The system kept flickering and going back to the same error screen. I panicked. I called Melanie's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Craig didn't answer either. And then, just as I was about to call the police, the motion sensors went off again. This time, the alert came from the master bedroom. I couldn't stay. I grabbed my bag, ran out of the house, and didn't look back. I didn't tell the couple what happened, how I'd felt someone in the house, how the note appeared out of nowhere. They never asked. They were just relieved to be back, as if nothing had happened at all. But I know what I felt. And I know I'll never step foot in that house again. Not after the way the shadows moved on their own, and the note that appeared with no explanation. I've moved to a new city now, far away from the house and its strange secrets. But every time I walk past a house with security cameras, I can't shake the feeling that someone is watching. I was only supposed to be in the apartment for a few days. I just moved to the city for work and hadn't found a permanent place yet. So when I saw the ad for a short-term rental in a quiet, unassuming building, I jumped on it. The apartment was small but cozy, with high ceilings and old wooden floors that creaked underfoot. Perfect for someone like me who wanted a quiet space to decompress after work. The landlord, a gruff, middle-aged man named Tom, was barely around, which suited me just fine. He handed me the keys and a vague set of instructions when I first moved in, saying the place was pretty safe and that the only thing I needed to worry about was keeping the door locked at night. His words stuck with me, even though he didn't explain why. He also mentioned that the building had been around for a long time and had some strange quirks, but he shrugged it off, so I didn't think much of it. The first few nights were uneventful. I got into a routine, and aside from a few strange noises I chalked up to the old pipes or creaking floorboards, I felt comfortable. But on the fourth night, I woke up to something unsettling. At first, it was just a soft tapping, like someone lightly knocking on wood. I looked at the clock, 3:15 a.m. My first thought was that it was just the building settling, but the tapping continued. Then it grew louder, more insistent. I froze, listening intently. It was coming from the hallway outside my door, almost like someone was dragging their fingers along the wall. I lay still, my heart pounding, unsure of what to do. But the tapping didn't stop. It was rhythmic, deliberate, and the sound was growing louder, closer. I should have called the landlord, but I didn't want to sound paranoid. Maybe it was just a neighbor up late. I got up and tiptoed to the door, peering through the peephole. Nothing, just an empty hallway. I was about to go back to bed when I heard the sound again, closer this time, right outside my door. I backed away, my hand clutching the doorknob. The tapping continued, slow and deliberate. Then, to my shock, the door handle began to jiggle. I stood frozen, my pulse racing. What was on the other side? After what felt like an eternity, the jiggling stopped. I didn't move. I held my breath, waiting for whatever it was to make its next move. Then I heard a voice, soft, raspy, as if it had been screaming for a long time. "Let me in." The voice was hoarse, broken. I couldn't understand it at first, and then it came again, louder this time. "Let me in. I'm cold." I backed away from the door, panic rising in my chest. My mind raced, but I couldn't figure out what to do. I wasn't sure if I should call the police or the landlord. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew it wasn't normal. I stayed motionless in the center of the room, trying to hear any sound beyond the door. But the voice didn't come again, not at first. There was a long, eerie silence. Then, just as I thought I might be imagining things, the door handle rattled again. I couldn't take it anymore. My hands were shaking, my breath shallow. I didn't open the door, but I peered through the peephole again. Nothing. The hallway was empty. I stood there for a while, just staring. It didn't make sense. I must have imagined the whole thing, right? But as I turned back into the room, something caught my eye. Something dark, slick, and unmistakable on the floor. A small stain, right under the spot where the door had been. I knelt down, my heart pounding in my ears. I ran my fingers over the stain, and my stomach dropped. It wasn't dirt. It was blood. Panic surged through me. How had I not noticed this before? How had it gotten there? I backed away from the stain, unable to tear my eyes away from it. But I didn't call the police. I didn't call anyone. I didn't know what to do, so I did the only thing I could. I packed up quickly and left. As I grabbed my things, I didn't want to look out the peephole again. I couldn't shake the image of the gaunt figure from earlier, the hollow eyes, the way it had just stared at me from the hallway. I rushed out the door, not caring about the mess I left behind. My legs were shaking, my mind in chaos. I wanted to leave. I just wanted to get away from that place. The rest of the night was a blur. I found a new place to stay, and in the morning, I called the landlord. No answer. I left a message, but he never called back. I couldn't help but wonder if he knew what had been happening there, or if he just didn't care. A week later, I returned to the building, hoping to grab a few more things I had forgotten. But when I arrived, the apartment was completely empty. No signs of the stain, no signs of anyone. The door to the hallway was locked and the building was silent. It was as if nothing had ever happened. I moved out for good, leaving the building behind. I never spoke to anyone about what happened, not the landlord, not the neighbors, not even the people I met at my new place. I didn't want anyone to think I was crazy.